Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about addiction, recovery, and relapse. A very elementary, basic series of concepts, just to see if that helps you understand a little bit more about what we're dealing with. It's the basic material that I use when I'm working with the probation clients as we review and reflect on their actual experience compared to the theories and textbooks that I've used for several years now. Uh, to start with, I like to talk about the symptoms of addiction or compulsive behavior or anything else you really want to call it. Some people are really reluctant to say they're an addict, but they might be willing to admit that their behavior got a little out of control, that sometimes they indeed engaged in some sort of behavior uh, that they hadn't planned on, and certainly that they experienced consequences that weren't being considered when they started their adventure. The symptoms are, as I understand them, are fairly interesting, and for you to perhaps get a grasp on them, I'm going to ask you to remember a simple phrase, and that phrase is the waiter serves dessert last. The waiter serves dessert last. Because I use the first letter from each of those words to describe the symptoms that I've come to identify from the material I've been using over the years. T, W, S, D, L. The first symptom is a very common one. You might experience in anything that you become habitual in doing. I mean, it can be anything from bingo to binging television, and anything that somehow or another stirs up your own internal chemistry in such a way that things go from being a little less voluntary and a little more compulsive. So it can apply to just about anything. So yeah, I'm doing these videos in 3 minute segments, trying to get in as much as I can and still keep the overall file length small. We're talking about TWSDL, the first symptom. All of the symptoms really can apply to anything that becomes a little less voluntary and more compulsive. But that first symptom is something we call tolerance. Tolerance explains the simple fact that the human brain adapts to just about anything. Uh, and the more it receives of a certain behavior or a certain chemical, the more that becomes normal. And therefore, the individual feels a need, a drive to exceed normal to get whatever kind of rush, emotional rush, physical rush that they're getting. Just about any compulsive behavior uh, can be linked to some sort of tolerance. Um, Tolerance is the reason why some people who drink on a regular basis can drink and feel just fine, a lot better than maybe some of us who would be under the table pretty quickly. They can drink and feel just fine because their body has learned to tolerate a certain amount of alcohol. However, that doesn't mean that the alcohol doesn't impair their performance, their ability, their instincts, their reactions, and it certainly doesn't mean that their body won't show a higher than usual blood alcohol content. That's why a lot of people who think they're just fine are a little surprised when they blow over point .08 when pulled over by the police and tested. Some people are actually surprised to realize that they're legally intoxicated, and that creates a lot of confusion for them. Tolerance explains why a person goes from a couple of beers to 6 beers, from 6 beers to a few shots of whiskey, from a few shots of whiskey to a half pint to a pint, and I've known people who drank a quart every day. The tolerance explains why I keep using more, why I went from snorting and smoking methamphetamine to eventually using a needle, because my body was just calling out and my brain was saying, I need more. I've tolerated that little amount. Now I need something really significant. The second primary symptom of compulsive or addictive behavior, when habit has gotten out of control, is again a fairly commonly known one. It's withdrawal. It's basically because a brain has become adjusted, adapted, dependent upon a certain behavior or a certain chemical, it essentially throws a fit when it no longer gets it. Withdrawal is the punishment that an addiction inflicts when you try to quit. So people who try to stop cigarettes, if they're addicted to the nicotine, they get really fairly nervous reactions, obsessive thinking, or a lot of discomfort, irritability, and so forth. When they quit drinking, their brain says, I need that alcohol in order to feel normal. And so, again, I have some nervous reactions. If it's a stimulant I've been using, like cocaine or methamphetamine, oftentimes withdrawal is almost always the exact opposite of the effect that the drug gave me. And so, methamphetamine being a stimulant, my withdrawal is a crash. Emotional energy, physical energy. Maybe I'm sleeping for a day or two. Maybe I just feel weak and tired and miserable. And again, not very pleasant to be around. Withdrawal is one of those reasons why it's hard to stop something when you develop a dependency on it. My brain just simply says, I can't stand this new normal without my regular fix. The third symptom is more of a psychological set of reactions that effectively allow me to continue doing something that is not in my own best interest. It's called generally self-deceptions. We've done tolerance, we've done withdrawal, now we're with the S, the self-deceptions. And there are actually a number of those that we'll talk about in the next 3-minute segment. There are actually a series of self-deceptions that are typical experiences. If you've experienced them yourself or you know someone, you can hardly blame anybody. It's how the brain responds. And unfortunately, it can make a bad situation much, much worse. The first self-deception is something many of us are familiar with in a variety of ways. It's called denial. Denial is the activity of the brain that simply will not allow me to understand, to see the whole picture, to really recognize what's going on. I'm not in denial if I lie to you about what's going on. I'm in denial when you see that I'm in trouble and I just can't see it. I might be very kind and caring and say, thank you very much for looking out after me and for coming to me like this. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but honestly, I'm just fine. I just like to have a little fun now and then. denial can be very difficult to break through. I've known people who, gone to jail, been in work release, and still came out fully believing they were just fine and they could return right back to their behavior. And it was going to be worth it. It was going to be a good time, and they really weren't out of control, really weren't in trouble. From denial, once we actually break through it, and how do we break through it? Well, a lot of times it's because, and again, I've known people like this, the biggest, baddest needle using meth guy I ever known told me the other day he's worried about me. Most of my friends who don't use have deserted me. My significant other is really upset with me, and I keep waking up in places I'm not sure where I am, how I got here, where my money is, where my vehicle is, and a variety of other even more graphic situations where I just plain don't remember how this happened. Eventually, that's not okay. It's not funny. It's not a good time. Eventually, I begin to accept that maybe I'm a little in over my head. But then quickly I go from the denial into my next best self-deception. After denial comes repression. Repression is that activity where we begin to understand that things may not be going well, but we're trying to pretend it's okay. We're past denial, but it's kind of like we have a problem. We see it over here out of the corner of our eye, but we don't want to look at it and we don't want to talk about it. So when you come to me and say, hey, John, I've been hearing stories about your behavior getting really out of hand. I can't really believe some of what I'm hearing. I'll say, hey, don't you miss baseball? I haven't watched a whole baseball game on TV for years, but right now I'm missing it a lot. What do you think the Cardinals are going to do this year? Or hey, what do you think of Brady leaving Boston? Don't you just wish he'd have just plain retired and disappeared from our lives? Anything to change the subject to keep us from looking at that thing, then I really don't want to look at it. I can repress something a long, long time. And meanwhile, my behavior continues and its impact continues, and the obsession, compulsion continues to build. Repression, however, requires a lot of energy, and eventually I get tired of repressing, or tired of changing the subject, tired of ignoring. And so I begin to face the facts. Okay, maybe things are a little out of control. Maybe this isn't whatever normal is. And I move into the third and perhaps our favorite self-deception is called rationalization. Rationalization, my sources tell me, as soon as you find yourself rationalizing something, it's clear evidence that even you know somewhere in your consciousness that this is not a good thing. We don't rationalize healthy, sane behavior. We have to rationalize things that really don't make a lot of sense, that really have a cost in excess of benefit. So how do we do it? It's like, why do we speed through a small town with a little speed limit? It's, well, everybody does it. Oh, they don't really mean it. No one's going to catch me. Hey, I'm in a hurry. I'm important. On and on and on. I could name a variety of rationalizations that let me off the hook and let me continue my behavior. With alcohol and drugs, well, let's just take a look at some of the rationalizations. The power behind rationalizations is that there's always at least a little truth in each of them. Most of what we claim does actually happen. It does kind of explain it, but it still allows us to ignore a lot of the truth, a lot of the reality. With drugs and alcohol, we ignore the fact that behavior might be illegal. Uh, well, why? Well, I'm a grown adult. I can do what I want. No government doesn't have any business in my personal life. I'm not hurting anybody. If I'm hurting anybody, it's myself, and that's my own business. None of your business. You need to stay out of that. Um, there are a whole lot worse things in the world to be doing. Everybody has their own little habit. This is mine. And so forth and so on. By rationalizing something again, it's like, even though I've begun to realize that this isn't in my best interest, uh, this allows me to keep doing it, to keep behaving. And if my tolerance is building, then I'm using more and more, or more intensely, more often. And I'm just building more and more of a dependency. In many cases, that also means the withdrawal is going to be a little bit more severe. So I've got all kinds of great reasons to just keep doing what I've been doing. Uh, and I've rationalized everything. Once I've gotten through this stage of rationalizing, I'm ready for the next self deception, and that's hiding. Essentially, I've gotten to the point where I'm tired of explaining my behavior to you. You may have been a good friend, you may be handling it really well and just coming to me with my interest at heart, but I'm tired of telling you that I'm fine. This is no big deal. It's not as bad as some of the things that people are doing we know about, and so forth. And so I just start avoiding you. If it's you calling me, I just don't answer it. If it's you knocking on the door, I don't go to the door. I certainly don't come visit you anymore. I don't go see the folks too much because, mom started to see, my eyes get a little red, and she's starting to suspect, or she knows, and I don't want to break her heart, so I'm just going to avoid her. I hide things physically. I may hide my alcohol behind the towels in the closet in the bathroom, so that my wife doesn't catch me. Because if she catches me, well, then I've got a big price to pay. I'm too smart to deal with that, um, and so forth. During hiding, I may physically hide what I'm using so that I don't get caught. If I don't get caught, I don't have to pay the price. During hiding, I may hide from you so that I don't have to explain it to you anymore. During hiding, I may hide the truth by just simply lying to you. This is where my self-deception becomes deceiving others. And I've got several different stories. Maybe I'll lose track of all of them. But yeah, I had to work late. I had a sick friend I needed to go take care of. I was just over at Billy's, and we were working on his car out back. No mention of the fact we were getting high while we were doing it. Um, I'm hiding. Sometimes I hide my behavior and still mingle with some of my non-using family or friends, and sometimes I just hide from all of them together and isolate myself, drinking or using. And sometimes I hide in the middle of a group of people who are perfectly fine with what I'm doing because they're doing it too. And so I'm hiding my alcohol use out with other people who are drinking, or at parties at their house, or cookouts, or whatever I may call it, and the next excuse I have for drinking. If I'm getting high, it's at my dealer's house with a bunch of other people. Uh, we're all great getting high together. We don't have any problems with each other unless, someone gets into my stash or something like that. But nobody is there, and I'm not paying attention to anybody who might be there to suggest I need to slow down or back off. And it's kind of like now I'm rolling downhill with no brakes at all because no one is trying to slow me down, no one that I'm letting into my life. that's when oftentimes things come off the rails. With hiding, if nothing else intervenes, that's when I finally come to realization things get bad enough for one reason or another that even I realize this has to change, this has to stop. But then my next self deception kicks in, and it's called delaying tactics. You've seen delaying tactics in people. Some folks who decided 15 years ago they needed to quit smoking cigarettes, but they're still smoking. They're still waiting for the right time, the right day. People who knew they needed to cut back on drinking or any other compulsive, habitual behavior, but I need to quit, but today's just not the right time. Maybe after the holidays, I'll give it a try. Delaying tactics allow me to not even take seriously uh, stopping something that I know I need to stop, and therefore things continue to deteriorate. So those are the self-deceptions: denial, repression, rationalization, hiding, delaying tactics. There are others, but those are the primary ones. Uh, they're dangerous because our brain already knows how to do all of them. Some of them our brain does automatically, and we certainly have built up a pretty good list of rationalizations that worked for us in the past. So they become really dangerous for us, even if we finally get clean, even if we finally stop our behavior, even if we are in recovery. Those self-deceptions are often the real tools that we use against ourselves that lead to a relapse. Tolerance, withdrawal, self-deception. The fourth symptom is something that my material calls distortion of attention. Distortion of attention, a strange little phrase, but it basically suggests that my attention has been distorted from what my true values are now to behavior surrounding my addiction. I love my family, I like my job, I want to provide. I really honestly mean that. It's truly who I am, truly what my value system says. But that's all been kidnapped, it's all been distorted, and now I spend a great deal of my time involved in acquiring, using, and recovering from using whatever it is I'm using, or recovering from whatever behavior I've been engaged in. I'm skipping out on work to go to the casino more often. I'm on my phone now doing sports gambling. Surely there's some sport somewhere still going on that I can gamble on. More and more time, more and more energy, more and more attention. All of it gets distorted. This is why it becomes really confusing for family and for outsiders who look at someone who swears, no, I love my family. My family is the most important thing in my life. It's just that my behavior has not exhibited that at all. To believe that there really is kind of a new dichotomy going on. This is who I really am, but this is me in the middle of my addiction, my compulsion. These are the things that really begin to tear families apart and to tear friends apart because I have a new first love, and it's not entirely voluntary. It's being driven by chemical reactions beyond my control, distortion of attention. So we finally get to the last of the five typical symptoms of compulsive or addictive behavior, and it's called loss of willpower. Now, if you go Googling willpower, you'll see there's a big argument going on and has been for quite some time whether willpower really exists. Maybe people who thought they had great willpower and were in control of their behavior, really were never facing the kind of challenge that someone who develops a compulsion develops. There seems to be commonality in brain structure and brain function and chemical reactions in the brain that make some people more susceptible to compulsive behavior. And when compulsive behavior takes over, such things like willpower become kind of a useless concept. Loss of willpower is interesting because obviously it really isn't a factor at all and can't be discovered at all until I've made up my mind to do something or not do something. I've decided I'm never going to buy another lottery ticket. This is it. I'm tired of it. And yet here I stand with 2 lottery tickets, or here I am heading back to the store to buy some more Powerballs up this week. I'm never going to go to the casino again. I'm never going to get involved in this behavior, that behavior again. I've paid enough price. I've hurt bad enough. I've hurt other people enough. I'm just going to stop. No more alcohol. That's it. No more drugs. I'm tired of the consequences. But even though I make up my mind and I'm absolutely serious in this moment and I'm determined to stay in control, next thing you know, here I am using again, drinking again, engaging that behavior again. Call it weakness, if you will, because essentially it is weak. I am not strong enough to overcome this compulsion, this drive in my brain, this chemical reaction within the most powerful part of who I am, my brain, my system that determines everything for me. Loss of willpower is that final evidence that I'm not really the one in control. And yeah, I quit smoking cigarettes. I quit 3 times last month, but I can't stay stopped. Those are the symptoms. TWSDL, tolerance withdrawal, self-deception, distortion of attention, loss of willpower.